retirement of after the retirement of Councilmember Wengraf, who's here. I just want to acknowledge your leadership in being our first chair. I'm a supervisor in Contra Costa County for those who are newer to this group, and we have a couple of new members. So what we're going to do on do a call to order, and everyone why don't we do this as the call to order? We'll ask everyone to introduce themselves and their agency. Maureen?
Good morning. I'm Maureen Toms. I am a council member in the city of Pinole.
Good morning. Marie Bowman, Rodeo Hercules Fire District. I'm the vice chair.
Hello, I'm Shoshana O'Keefe, council member from the city of Berkeley.
Good morning. I'm Nikki Fortunato Bass on the Alameda County Board of Supervisors.
I'm Lisa Mochiyama, councilperson for El Cerrito.
Chris Kelly, vice mayor, city of Hercules.
Jorge Labano, Richmond City Council member.
Oh, and we have our Oakland council member here. We're going to pull up another chair and we're going to have a nice full house here. And Janani, do you want to introduce yourself? Perfect timing, perfect timing. Here.
Good morning, everyone. Janani Ramachandran, Oakland City Council. Happy to be here.
Great. As I said, we have a pretty full presentation, so we're going to go through the other items relatively quickly. Under the chair's report, I do want a couple things from the last meeting. We are working with Contra Costa County Consolidated Fire District about that agency serving as the fiscal agent for us. And I think the goal is for that to happen by July 1st, the new fiscal year. I also serve on that board. The Board of Supervisors is also the board of the fire district. So we are working toward that, and we've appreciated the work so far. John, you know, your nonprofit, and so we appreciate that you're all the fiscal agent now, and we're going to hopefully get that transferred by July 1st. We are working toward that. In terms of the balance of funds, I'm informed that we have approximately $25,000. And we did at our previous meeting talk about dues, and based on the direction that was provided at that last meeting, we will be sending out a letter to all the agencies to knowing that you all need time during your budget process, which you're embarking on. I know we are at the county, so to process the dues for the organization again, starting for the new fiscal year. So we'll send that out. So those were the chair's report items. Item 3 is approval of the minutes of November 14th, and you don't have to have been present to be able to vote on them. You can abstain or you could vote for them. So in your package are the approval of the minutes, or the minutes themselves from the November 14th meeting. Are there any questions on the minutes? Is there any public comment on the minutes? And then we'll also ask anyone participating by Zoom as well. Any public comment on minutes? All right, hearing none. Do we have a motion?
Move approval of the minutes.
Second.
A motion and a second. And since we have no one participating by Zoom yet, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes.
Chair, for your notification, Brent Blackaby and Mike Torlingson are on Zoom.
Okay, and Brent's not voting because we have the regular council member here. Got it. Okay. All right, so our first presentation is by East Bay Municipal Utility District on water system preparedness. And I've seen this presentation, and after seeing it, felt it was really important for all of us to see it. And I've heard questions. I know each of our agencies has questions about East Bay Mud's preparedness. And I want to say I served on the East Bay Mud board during the Oakland Hills fire. And was it 91, 92, 91? And I remember with the loss of power that happened from that fire, a number of the pumping plants had the power to be able to resupply the tanks in the neighborhoods that feed neighborhoods by gravity feed. And in the aftermath of that, I know East Bay Mud took steps to install standby generators and a number of other improvements so that water would continue to flow if there were power outages. And we continue, I think, to hear questions about that. We wanted to hear from East Bay Mud about where they are and a lot of their water system planning to prepare for wildfires. So with that, I'm going to introduce the general manager, Clifford Chan. Clifford, thank you for being here and having your whole team, and appreciate East Bay Mud's hard work in working with cities and counties to ensure that we're for wildfires. So thanks.
So thank you, Supervisor Joya. Thank you for the commission. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you. As the supervisor noted, we did meet with them back in January to talk about East Bay Mud's wildfire and fire preparedness. We shared a lot of the lessons learned from the 91 fire. I will say this is a topic, after the devastating fires in Los Angeles, this is a question we've been getting from a lot of different communities. We have met with a number of communities, Oakland Fire, Berkeley Fire, San Ramon, MOFD, Con Fire. And if there's anyone else here that's interested for having us to come and present a similar type of presentation, we'd be happy to come out and make that type of presentation. I think we all recognize that, the challenges that we saw in Los Angeles, this requires a lot of collaboration between the communities, various groups, and the residents. But, this is something that we're going to talk about today. I do have a lot of staff here to be able to answer the questions you may have. The main presenter will be David Briggs, our Director of Operations and Maintenance. I also have two board members here, Director Andy Katz and Director Joey Smith are here as well. And before we start the presentation, Director Katz would like just to say a few words. So.
Great.
Thank you, General Manager Chan, and thank you, Chair Joya and members of the East Bay Wildfire Coalition for inviting East Bay Mud to make this presentation. I think with the experience that we just witnessed with the catastrophic fires in Los Angeles, it's even more important that our jurisdictions work together. I'm the board member representing El Cerrito, Kensington, Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville, and the northern portion of Oakland. And my colleague Joey Smith represents the remainder of West Contra Costa County. So we are here committed to having a dialogue with our colleagues in local government in elected office to make sure that our agencies are getting prepared and that we're taking the necessary actions. What the Los Angeles experience has told us is that we have a lot of questions and need to recognize the real and expected normal capacity limits of what a municipal water system would provide in a catastrophic fire situation. That's what we saw in Los Angeles. We're still waiting for particulars about their local investigation, but it is a normal and expected that there would be a capacity limit to what water pressure can actually accomplish. And what that tells us, though, is that it's even more important to focus on fuel reduction. I would like to continue this dialogue over the course of the years to talk about how is our agency, how is East Bay Regional Parks District, and our abutting lands that are either public lands or wild lands, how are we enhancing fuel management to really be as preventative as possible? Like what you're seeing the city of Berkeley doing and looking at strategic priorities, taking a look at the science and looking at where is the most important place to focus efforts. We should be doing that on a corridor-wide effort. We should be working with our fire chiefs, working with our other scientific advisors and thinking about those strategic priorities, especially as there's a very large pool of funds from Proposition 4 and perhaps sometime in the future additional federal funds. But really,
I thought that we were just having them.
Whoever's on Zoom, they want to mute themselves.
But the whole schedules.
Really focused on Proposition 4.
Right. But technically, yeah, the only changes were to
some city of El Cerrito Zoom mute themselves.
I mean, we're going to come back with, or we're going to come back, but we haven't done negotiations yet with the police chief, the fire chief.
El Cerrito fire chief is going to figure it out.
We've done negotiations with the others, but not this one. So I'm just wondering if we should just have the SEIU salary schedule in there.
We can. Didn't know if it was like a matter of semantics with
they're adopting that document and it needs to go as a
Or
whole.
that, or just so
But I
we hear
can
it.
definitely break it out.
While they're taking.
Yes.
Excellent,
It
because
is.
the
Yes.
presentation is very important. Thank you.
Yes. And now the slides, we are going to have posted, everyone should have had the slides emailed to them, and we're going to have the slides posted with the agenda materials so people can go back and look at this important slide. So yeah, you want to finish up?
What I'm
Thanks.
emphasizing is that, the $10 billion that the state legislature is about to elaborate more rules for. I think it's important that our communities be collaborating and thinking about how are those program areas further defined so that wildland urban interface communities are in a better position to access what we need to reduce high risk vegetation, address what's happening in the wildland urban interface, but also that East Bay Mud and the Parks District are empowered to ask for what we need to keep our communities safe.
Got it.
So
Great.
with that in mind, I'm
Thanks.
happy to hand it over to
Great.
David Briggs, our Director of Operations.
Great. Thanks, Andy.
Hi, good morning. I'm David Briggs, East Bay Med, Director of Operations and Maintenance, and I think someone's going to help me advance the slides. Thank you. Okay, so good morning. We're happy to be here. We want to be responsive. I have about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more than that. So Supervisor Joya, if that timing sounds about right.
That's great. You're gonna, and someone else is gonna finish it off, correct?
I think I'm gonna go through about 10 minutes of the pre-prepared material.
Got it.
But we have many people here
Right.
who are subject matter experts if we get
Got
into that. And I do want to emphasize that when we get into this topic, we're going to be covering a wide swath of topics that as we prepare, respond, and hopefully prevent wildfire. It's truly a wide variety of efforts at East Bay Mud, and we're probably going to touch on all of them. And we have the people here who can help respond.
Great.
Okay, so we do typically start these presentations with a bit of a primer about how our water system works. And as Director Katz and General Manager Chan were alluding to, there are practical limits to our water system, and it's helpful to kind of go over that really quickly. So what's shown on the slide in front of you is generally, this is our service area. The different colors correspond to a different water treatment plant that serves each of those areas. But this varies throughout the season, and we do have flexibility to serve different areas from different water treatment plants. And that gives us a lot of reliability and robust operations. Go ahead, next one. So what's shown here is a cartoon. The beautiful landscape that we enjoy in the East Bay has a lot of hills, a lot of valleys, and a great distance of elevation change down from sea level up to about 1,800 feet. Operating a water distribution system in that kind of terrain is very challenging. So we often lift through multiple stages of pumping to get to these reservoirs that are typically at higher elevation. And what this diagram depicts is, if you sort of focus on these cartoon subdivisions, if you will, on the right-hand side, the one in the middle, the lighter color of olive green there, shows how that subdivision could be served not only from the reservoir above it, which is gravity flowed down to that subdivision. But that subdivision can also serve the one below it through a pressure regulator, as well as that lower one has its own gravity fed reservoir. So there is a lot of flexibility in this multiple lift system that we have. And some neighborhoods have multiple ways of getting water as we move it up the hill. And I will address the reliability of the power, which I know is kind of integral to having all this stuff work. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, next slide. Here we have generally the orange is a gravity fed area. Obviously that's the lower elevation areas of our service area west of hills. And the green and the red are areas that we lift up to. So these are the areas that need power to get up to those reservoirs that are then gravity fed down to those neighborhoods and subdivisions. And also shown here is or was shown there was the water treatment plants that serve each. Okay. This is just a piece of our water system. We're not showing the whole east of Hills area. This is the west of Hills area.
Excuse me 1 second. There was a note that those viewing on Zoom don't see the bottom of the slides. So Robert, they can figure out how that can get fixed. Okay. You can go.
Okay.
Go forward.
So this is part of our service area, the west of Hills area. We have 74 pressure zones. That is a lot for a water utility. Again, every time we have a valley and a peak and elevation change, we have lots of neighborhoods in small little valleys that we have to gravity flow down into. So that leads to a lot of pressure zones, a lot of reservoirs and pump stations. We have a total of 505 million gallons of water storage of capacity. Some of that is seasonally offline right now. We're getting out of winter, headed towards spring. In a few months, we'll bring about 10 million gallons of storage back online for the summer. But we do have some reservoirs are offline during the winter time when the hills are green and we're not in red flag. We do that for water quality purposes. But when demand increases in the summer and we have more turnover of the water and higher demand, we fill those reservoirs in the summer, which coincidentally is when we need it most for wildfire protection. Next slide. As Supervisor Joya referred to, 1991 was a pretty big event for East Bay Mud, and we learned a lot. We built in these improvements. We prepare differently. We have different infrastructure. We're better prepared. If the 1991 fire happened again, things would be very, very different. We have backup power that is already there, most notably at our Claremont Center, which is a location right on the west side of the Claremont Tunnel, the Caldecott Tunnel, near Highway 24 and Highway 13. That location has 3 pump stations that lift water up. There's a permanent large generator there that is fueled and ready to go at any time. And I'll get into this a little bit later when we talk more substantively about PSPS preparation. But we have a lot of other generators that we deploy prematurely and proactively before we get into the summer and fall season when we're most vulnerable to wildfire. But lots of things besides infrastructure. We have emergency preparedness, emergency operations teams, better communication with fire departments. We have consistency of our hydrants, which unfortunately was not there in 1991, which you may have heard about. There was a different physical size of hydrants between the Berkeley and the Oakland side. We've either replaced those hydrants or given the fire department adapters, so we should not have that problem in the future. And we have better infrastructure that is less prone to fire and more reliable if we had that event again. Go ahead and advance it. On the collaboration side, many of these things were spawned out of the 1991 event as well. East Bay Mud organizes a fire agency forum. This is across our service area, so every fire department, east of Hills, west of Hills, is invited to this forum. The Hills Emergency Forum was specifically an outcome of the 1991 event. We are part of that. We're an active part of that, and we regularly see our counterparts on the fire department side. We get to know each other. We know them. They know us. We talk about issues. We talk about collaboration. Some of these events even have joint exercises. So the level of collaboration that occurs now is substantially different than it was a couple decades ago. We're here now, just mentioning the East Bay Wildfire Coalition. We're here now, and we do play a role and are happy to support this coalition and appear in front of you. On the vegetation management, so switching to that, we have 29,000 acres. We're, I think, the second largest landowner next to East Bay Parks in the East Bay, 29,000 acres. Mike reminds me that 10,000 of those acres are below water. I think 2,000 of those acres are below water. But a lot of vegetation management, about $2.5 million a year is spent by East Bay Mud grazing either goats or using mechanical means to maintain fire code and fire protection of all of our properties. Vegetation management is a very, very active part of what we do because we are such a large landowner. Fire roads, 150 miles of fire roads are maintained. The photo here, I believe, is Fish Ranch Road looking south. So just finished or are actively working on a fire break in this very strategic location along the ridge that would help prevent a fire from the east side getting to the west side. So Mike Togliani is here and can help answer any questions about vegetation management in the watersheds that are immediately east of us here. We also participate and collaborate with CAL FIRE on controlled burns. We have a lot of property to manage and we keep it well maintained. Okay, switching more to infrastructure. Thank you. So we do have a regular replacement and renewal program. A lot of our capital program is geared towards upgrading pump stations and reservoirs. We have spare pumps at every pump station. We have reliable power supply. We have the ability to put a generator there. A lot of the exterior of our facilities are generally fireproof. They're not made of wood, obviously, they're made of stucco or metal. And we've seen that as we've seen wildfire here and there, we've seen the ability of these structures to withstand that. We have a lot of emergency equipment. We have a fleet of generators that we have in our service area, in our service yards, ready to go. And we have the staff that are very well trained to deploy them. I'll get into a little bit more detail later. We maintain this equipment. We don't just leave it there and let it gather dust. We exercise the generators. We exercise the pumps. We keep everything in good working order. It's a big part of being ready, is having your system well maintained. So just one more look at the reservoirs in the next slide. So I did mention that seasonally, we do have a small subset of our reservoirs go out of service for water quality purposes. That's just to reduce the water age. During the winter, demand goes down by a factor of 2 almost, because no one's irrigating. So that leaves water in reservoirs too long. Water is not like wine. It does not improve with age. So we like to have a short residence time for our water in our reservoirs. As demand picks up in the summertime, we bring these reservoirs back online. And then let's talk a little bit more about red flag specifically in the next slide. When a red flag is declared, and we get that from the National Weather Service, we immediately fill all of our reservoirs that we have. Everything is online that we have in the summer, that's filled to the brim. And on top of that, we keep the pumping going, which, as you probably know, is expensive because we have to use on-peak power. But we do that because we need to keep the reservoirs full. So we are ready to go anytime a red flag is triggered. And then I'll get into the reservoirs and go ahead and go to the next slide. So we, for better or for worse, have gotten a lot of practice installing generators over the last 5 or 6 years as PG&E has gotten into this mode where they occasionally declare a PSPS event, public safety power shutoff. So when that occurs, when we hear about a PSPS event, actually, we don't even wait for PG&E to notify us. We just look at the calendar that as we get into August, we pre-deploy reservoir generators at several dozen pump stations in the hills. So it's pre-deployed and fueled and tested and hooked up. And many of them will automatically switch over if we lose power. So we didn't even need to be there. They have what's called switch gear, that if we lose line power, many of these will automatically switch over and the generator will come on without us even being there. And the fuel is topped off regularly. We keep an eye on that. As I said, we regularly deploy these every season. We remove them usually when it starts to rain, and an end of the fire season around here, which typically is around mid-November. Then we will remove those generators, but they are there during the late summer and all throughout the fall. Let's see, and then let's go to the next one. Thank you. So communication is very important. We need to know how to reach the fire department. They need to know how to reach us. So at a tactic level, firefighters out on the scene, regardless of what city they're in, we serve 15 or 20 cities. We have a lot of fire departments that we interact with. They know how to reach our dispatch center. They know how to reach our plumbers and our operators. So if they need more pressure or they need assistance, we are right there to support them. So this is very, very active at the lower levels in each organization, and it's very well practiced, and we regularly support each other. And obviously we're on the job 24/7. The next slide just illustrates what could have been a serious event, but turned out to be a relatively minor event. It was the Keller fire in October. This was a fire that started on a very, very dry condition in October. It was immediately adjacent to a residential neighborhood. Oakland Fire responded immediately. Cal Fire responded very, very quickly. Luckily, the wind was low that day, and the fire was contained very, very quickly. But we were actively collaborating with our control center was actively talking to the fire department. We had staff on scene supporting the fire department. And I don't know if the videos are playing. If you click it one more time, I think the videos might show the animation, but maybe not. But Cal Fire was actively using our large raw water reservoirs, which are east of the hills, east of here. We have very large raw water reservoirs that Cal Fire can dip into with their very large fleet of aircraft. It was a relatively quiet day for Cal Fire, and so they were able to hit this very hard and very, very quickly. and had a shockingly large amount of aircraft flying around containing this fire. But we were actively there supporting them in both Cal Fire and Oakland Fire. The last thing I have before we can certainly entertain any questions is just a bit about hydrants. Let's see. So our hydrants are meet fire code. We know what fire code is. We design our fire hydrants and our water system to meet fire code. Typically in a residential neighborhood, the flow out of a hydrant is anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 gallons per minute. It's higher in downtown areas where you might have a high rise or more fuel, if you will. But in typical residential neighborhood in the hills, that's a typical hydrant performance specification is 1,000 to 1,500 gallons per minute. We have storage in all these zones. So I showed several times how we have these reservoirs up in the hills that will gravity flow and will feed these hydrants even if there's a loss of power. So that amount of storage that we keep up there, even though there is daily use of water by everyone that lives up there, we will never go below a certain amount of storage that we reserve for a fire. And we just refill it on a diurnal or daily basis. And then just wanted to emphasize, I think Director Katz and Clifford both mentioned this, that our municipal domestic water system is designed, and fire code is designed to meet individual structural fires in residential neighborhoods. It's not designed to stop a wind-driven wildfire. So there are practical limits to our water system. And so I think that concludes what we wanted to show ahead of time. And if there's any question, depending on what area it's in, one or more of us may be up here answering.
Great. I'm sure there's questions. I'll start with just a couple and turn it over to my colleagues who I'm sure have questions. On your that last point, because we've heard this more and more, these major fires that start off as a sort of urban-rural interface fire turn into more of these major urban fires. We've seen this in Los Angeles, and a lot of experts say that, now we have to use strategies that are really about fighting mass urban fires, not just the interface fire. And the comment has been that there's just in that type of fire not enough pressure in the system, right? Because the system is not designed to handle having that many hydrants open. It reduces the pressure.
That's correct.
Right. So seeing that we're seeing more of this from a water agency standpoint, what do you see as the type of improvement to be able to improve pressure in certain identified areas that may be adjacent to, that may be candidates for a wildfire spreading into an urban zone, like in Santa Rosa is a perfect example, right? Santa Rosa and Los Angeles, those two incidents. Do you see a practical way to redesign? Obviously, be very expensive. What do you need working with fire districts, cities, and counties?
So I'm sure probably we would all maybe answer that question slightly differently, but I would look to the fire department for what type of incident do you want to engage with? I mean, the 80-mile-per-hour wind that we saw in Los Angeles is probably extreme, and that would be nearly impossible to fight.
I'm saying you'll never have a water system designed to meet that flow.
And I think the fire departments would tell you that as well, not just the water people. But in terms of incremental improvements, I would look to the fire agencies to say, what is that incremental improvement that you're looking for? And then engineers can do amazing things, but yes, it's expensive. But I think to start that conversation, whether it's vegetation management, building code, more setback distance, more pressure, more storage, I think the first step would be talking to the fire departments and asking them what they feel is the next. I mean, they're fighting the fire, not us. They're using our water, but they're out there boots on the ground fighting it. And I would look to them for that first.
And let's say we came up with a set of improvements and looking at the ability to finance that. I know I was on the board also during East Bay Mud Board during Loma Prieta, and in the aftermath of that, I know the East Bay Mud Board did a seismic improvement project and did a line item on the bill for a 10-year seismic improvement program to upgrade the system. So conceivably, you could, let's say we collectively came up jointly with the improvements that would improve pressure and capacity, you could charge that to the ratepayers on the water bill. It's obviously up to your board to do that, but that would be a financing mechanism potentially, right?
Yes, that's one financing mechanism. And then just who pays would be another. Because some of the
Right, right, which zone, yeah, I get it. You'd have to do a study, but you could charge, you don't have to go to a vote. You could charge it on the water bill. And the question would be then to apportion out what's a fair share and who pays for those improvements. Right.
I'm getting the nudge from the
Because
general
you're-
manager here.
Because I think you're exempt from Prop 218, so you don't have to go to the voters on water bill increases.
No, I mean, we are subject to Prop 218.
But I mean, you don't have to go to voters for increasing the water rates.
No, that's correct.
I meant water and wastewater is exempt from 218 in that sense.
Yeah. So right now, our board policy, and this is something that's been played out, if there are improvements to the water system that need to be made, in addition to what we currently meet, the board policy is the community will pay for those improvements, not all of the ratepayers.
Right.
This has happened. Kensington took a vote. They've made the improvements. They paid for the improvements. Arinda took us to a vote. They actually voted it down 3 times for those types of improvements. So it's our board policy that if there are improvements to a particular community, the community would have to take it to the vote and pay for it.
Right. Although that could be open for discussion. I mean, we're in new times. Let's say, right, with the board. I get it. Not right. The discussion with the board. Because I know that the seismic improvement program was paid for by the water rates. That was 100% paid for by water rates.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, I get it. So I know there's a board policy, but if let's say we come up with some shared sort of funding, whether it's cities, county, fire districts, water district, everything is open for discussion. Just like our city council board of supervisors, we all can change policy. Your board could presumably change policy if it ends up being the right thing for all of us to do.
I understand. I just want to be clear, like what the current policy is.
Sure. Got it. The other thing, you have standby generators at a lot of the pumping plants. So the question I know I asked you before that I get asked is, why is it you think you don't need them at every pumping plant location? And talk about how you would move them to where they're needed during a fire or crisis, and how you've staged them, and sort of assuring the public how that you have enough in place, or do you need more?
Yeah, and Dave mentioned this earlier, but the public safety power shutoff, I think, had us and probably lots of agencies look at this. We studied, because, the tanks, the reservoirs that Dave talked about, they're different sizes, and so we looked at what the demand would be on those particular tanks. We looked at the pumping capacity in the area. We looked at there are maps of the fire risk. And so we mapped out, how much storage we have in a particular area, where do we need these? And depending on the area, we strategically deploy it. Just to give you a little comfort, that first year of the PSPS, PG&E, we have a little over 400 facilities. PG&E shut off the power to over 200 of our facilities. We had strategically deployed, and it lasted, if you can remember, multiple days, I think 5-6 days in some areas that the power was shut off. We had strategically deployed all the portable generators and pumps. We had not a single customer get impacted. And I would say we have done these type of studies to say, where do we need it? Now, while you could put it in lots of locations, it's not necessary in all locations because of how the system was designed. And certainly, if we think we need, generators or pumps in other locations, we can deploy it. But it's just how the system designed and the size of the facilities, it's not necessary. The other particular challenge of just having it there all the time, because if you're going to put a portable generator at some of our pump stations, some of these pump stations, there's just not a lot of property. So during the PSPS, these generators are on the street all the time because there's no place on our property to put it. And so, we reach out to the community and tell them, hey, it's PSPS time, we're going to have this. The community has been very understanding, but there's really no other place to put it. And it's really not needed all the time because, there is a very distinct fire season that can grow. And if the fire season grows, it would just be out there longer.
And my last question is, you've got representatives of most of the jurisdictions, including fire agencies along in your area in the wildfire zone. What would you need? Is there an ask that you have of municipal government or fire districts in general to help you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, for me, the important ask is the first thing I talked about and Director Kath talked about, we need to continue to work together. This is everybody's challenge to work together on this one. We need to continue to coordinate with the fire departments because depending on whether it's a wind-driven fire, fire after an earthquake, a single structure fire, the fire departments have different strategies. We need to understand what those different strategies are. And I think there's also a discussion, as cities and counties develop certain areas, more thoughtful planning within, especially the WUIs, looking at the different types of building materials, maintaining defensible space. We maintain defensible space on our property, but again, making sure that the homeowners maintain defensible space. All those collectively will help minimize that risk. And I think, what we're doing here today is exactly what we need to do, continue going forward. We need to work together. We need to communicate. We need to coordinate. And that's going to prevent those type of issues from happening in the future. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today because that's what it's going to take. It's not just East Bay mud, and your hydrants. Is all of our problem, all of our issues, and it can only be solved if we all work together.
Great. Thanks, Clifford. Why don't we go to questions? We'll start and move down. I think everyone have a chance to ask any questions, and then we'll go to public comment.
Thank you for that presentation. I have two questions. The
And
first,
by the way, everyone should introduce themselves. We'll get like nameplates here for another meeting so people can see, who we are. But we'll start with our council member from Pinole.
I'm a council member from Pinole. I also serve as an alternate to EBRICS, the East Bay Radio Communication System. And one of my questions is can you just talk about the co-location on some of your property for radio systems for emergencies that East Bay Mud is able to partner with?
I have to, I want to just answer this question. I believe some of those locations are co-located on our facilities for the EBRICS right now. So I think that's happening right now.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is a couple of years ago, I had a fellow council member try to urge the city to enter into an MOU with East Bay Mud related to post-disaster service. Does that sound familiar? And can you just talk about what would an MOU get a city versus not having an MOU?
Yeah, and we actually met with Supervisor Joya about this
Before the pandemic, right? And the pandemic stopped it all, right?
Happened. But the concept on this one, this was prompted by the earthquake. We know that the big Hayward 7 earthquake is going to happen. And, after the earthquake, there will be many main breaks. I mean, we estimate, 5,000 plus main breaks in our system. And the idea behind the MOU is, again, it's about coordination ahead of the emergency. Can we work with the cities? Can we work with the counties to identify points of distribution where we might be able to harden the pipeline to a particular location so that people, and a location has good ingress and egress so that the community can have access to water, because with all these main breaks, it's quite likely, many homes won't have access to water, and we won't have the resources to fix every main break out there, but we can make sure that particular points of distribution can have the water. Part of that was, let's get into an agreement so we can, with your support, identify where those locations will be. Again, knowing ahead of time where those locations will be. And also, I think the other important thing is for us to communicate to our customers, your residents, to say, after the earthquake, is expected that they're going to say, hey, where is the water at my home? But if everybody can communicate, look, East Bay Mud needs to focus on the main arteries first before we get to the homes, so that we're not pointing fingers at the emergency saying we're working together. And right now you can get the water from the points of distribution while East Bay Mud restores the pipelines, the large pipelines, and we'll get to your community, but it might take a little more time. And so that's the concept behind that MOU.
And what would be good is for you to maybe together. I know you had a couple of, I think one or two with some cities you may have done.
Yes.
But to actually get that to us again, and maybe we'll have some future discussion about our agencies doing that again.
Yeah, we can
taking that up again. Okay. Right.
All right. I just want to share that I think part of your question was, does signing the MOU or not signing get you some kind of status? And I think Clifford would agree with me that in a massive disaster like that, we are all under a unified command dealing with health and safety issues. And a lot of those jurisdictional boundaries melt away. So we will go where the people need us to go, and probably under a broader Cal OES direction. So, I mean, Clifford can override me, but I don't think signing or not signing the MOU.
Right. Yeah. And you don't know what's going to happen in an emergency and where the needs are going to be. Right?
We don't. But again, it's always good to plan before the emergency.
Got it. Okay. Director Bowman.
Yes, Marie Bowman, Radio Hercules Fire District Director. Thank you for sending so many teams and really showing we are one down to the LA fire area. It was highly impressive that you were able to send as many staff as you did. My question today is probably more for what the community, residential homeowners, and what can we do? On the TV and the newspapers, we saw a lot of water running down the street and homes completely gone. Would it be helpful if one would have to evacuate to be able to shut off their own water at the source so that that water wouldn't be running down the street, having more pressure?
Yeah, we could talk about, I actually want to have Dave. Dave actually had experience after the Paradise Fire, and so he can talk about what that response looked like.
It's a very selfless act when this happens, because I've heard from people that say, when I'm out of here, I'm turning my sprinklers on, I'm turning my shower on, I'm pointing the hose at my roof, and I'm getting out of here. And that will collectively draw the pressure down. And so the firefighter 2 blocks down is going to be hampered. A selfless act would be to not turn your water on and isolate your service. But that's that's the question.
Thanks. It was a good question. Good question. Yeah. Councilmember O'Keefe.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Councilmember O'Keefe, City of Berkeley. I have 2 questions. One is regarding the seasonal reservoirs that you mentioned that are sometimes they're full in the summer and empty in the winter. And I'm curious, I'd love a little more specificity on how the decision to drain them is made and if fire season is taken into account. We have one in Berkeley. I'm specifically interested in the one at Wildcat Canyon, but I'm also interested in your policy in general.
Yes, so we look at this always to maintain the fire flows. So that's always a consideration. The other consideration that's important is to make sure that, as I think Dave mentioned, we can maintain water quality. Because if you have too much storage, you can't maintain the water quality. That's also a risk to the customers. We will not take out these reservoirs at the expense of maintaining fire flows. But the decision to take a reservoir out of service or not seasonally is to make sure that we can make sure that every single day when the customers are drinking their water, that the water quality can be maintained. But fire flow is always a consideration.
It's always a consideration, but
to make sure that we can maintain the fire flow.
So is it fair to say that regardless of whether they are drained or full, your fire preparedness from those reservoirs is always at maximum?
Between the reservoirs and our pumping capacity, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question has to do with vegetation management. I appreciated in the presentation some specific examples of great work you're doing. And I was wondering if it would be possible for agencies like us to access your specific plans and timelines, because we get questions from constituents a lot, like when are they going to clear this? I specifically have a question about a grove of eucalyptus that's near do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm very familiar with that one.
Okay. So I'm curious about that, but I think it would be more helpful to ask for this panel, like, can we see those plans? And so we can just answer these questions when they come up from our constituents.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We can share with you particular plans. That particular location that I'm very familiar with, we have met with Berkeley Fire on that particular grove. As I understand it, and Dave, you can correct me, many of those are actually not on our property. But those that are that we feel working with Berkeley Fire is a risk, we will address. There are often times where a resident just may want us to cut a tree that is not a risk, not a concern of the fire. Those we probably won't get to.
Okay, when you say address, what do you mean?
Somebody sees a tree, they're concerned, but it's not a risk in terms
We'll
of
address it and then you'll assess the risk and act accordingly.
we will assess risk. We'll speak with the fire department. If it's identified as a fire risk, then we would address it. If it's just somebody just wants a tree removed, that's where it probably won't be removed.
Okay, thank you. I will follow up and
yes, happy to share all the information with you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Ramachandran.
Mike. Thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to zoom out, and you mentioned after 91 that there were 2 coordinating groups set up, the fire agency forum and the Hills Emergency Forum, and now you're a technical advisor to this body. Are the former 2 groups still active, and are you still a part of it? Is my first part.
Yes, we were a founding member of the Hills Emergency Forum. That is an active forum. as well as the fire forum that we have that happens every year and it continues.
Thank you. And then my second question is, this is a new body, and the way that we are operating as a coalition of governments and our mandate is expanding and growing, and we want to be as collaborative as possible with all of our regional agencies. How do you think that this coalition of governments can support the work that you've been doing since 91 on a regional basis?
Again, right now we're the technical advisor. I think it would be an opportunity, and Mike Pagnoli is here and Director Katz. I mean, they're probably more familiar with everything that this East Bay Wildfire Coalition is working on. So maybe I'll hand it off to Director Katz.
Councilmember Ramachandran, thank you for the question. I think it's important to be evolving East Bay Wildfire Coalition as the work continues. And what started with really great work at the Hills Emergency Forum still continues at the staff level, with the fire chiefs collaborating with the technical staff at East Bay Mud and East Bay Parks and other partners. What I think has happened, and there were a lot of conversations over the last year and a half with Councilmember Wengraf, myself, and several other leaders, is making sure that we found a place within East Bay Wildfire Coalition to make sure that the technical work could happen through the advisory committee. So that is a place where we have East Bay Mud, East Bay Parks, EUC, PG&E. That's a place where technical staff are able to get together. I think what we're still missing, though, is making sure that the elected level from East Bay Parks and East Bay Mud are able to work with you. I think it would make sense when we have appropriate conversations that we have board liaisons sitting here with you in conversation, so that, like what I mentioned at the beginning, when we're talking about receiving scientific findings about the best strategy for vegetation management, that we dialogue about that live together, and that we have a shared sense of information. So I'd like to continue the dialogue offline to find structures that enable that kind of conversation. That's a suggestion.
When we first started the effort to organize a coalition, one of the things we started with, John remembers this, is to take the Hills Emergency Forum, which has all these agencies, expand it, and then have an elected board, have a board with the electeds. And at that time, since the Hills Emergency Forum was pretty much staff driven, it was the staff's technical folks working together. They said, we don't want the electeds involved. What was interesting is all of them work for electeds, so I don't think the issue ever went before the boards. So that was how we started this discussion to bring us all together, and former Councilmember Wengraf remembers that too. It's like we were trying to take that existing structure before creating a new one, and just have a board of policy folks who can then talk from a policy standpoint. But so I do think it may make sense we can have discussion here in the future whether to have elected members from East Bay Regional Parks and East Bay Mud serve on this, and as opposed to the relationship or role that exists now. So
that's how we got here. That's exactly right. What became challenging is the way, and it's hard to speak in great detail. I cannot speak for East Bay Parks, but I do think it's important that East Bay Mud and East Bay Parks continue to work together. We've long had a liaison committee. There are reasons that certain agencies were not able to sign on to the MOU given their perceptions of the mission. I think it's important for our agencies to be in that deep and live conversation.
Right. Thanks. Okay. All right, Supervisor Fortunato Bass.
Thank you for the presentation. Supervisor Nikki Fortunato Bass with Alameda County. I am interested in hearing a little bit more about your relationship with PG&E. Specifically, you mentioned that you pre-deploy before PG&E's power safety power shutoffs, and I'm curious to hear sort of what that looks like in terms of East Bay Mud making the decision, and whether, and perhaps we need a presentation from PG&E, whether or not their criteria has changed in terms of when they do the PSPS. I've had at least one constituent reach out to our office being very concerned in January about high winds and no PSPSs. And I know that's in PG&E's realm, but I'm very curious to hear how East Bay Mud's work relates to PG&E and their PSPS decisions.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't think certainly early on the PSPS, the relationship was particularly good. It was very difficult to get information from PG&E. We are much better now in terms of coordinating. And when I say coordination is them giving us information in advance, having them understand which facilities are critical facilities for East Bay Mud. So in that first PSPS, they shut off the power to our treatment plants, which is, very difficult to manage without power. We do have, backup power, but, we'd rather not be off of power. They also shut off power. Dave Briggs mentioned, that Claremont Center, a very important facility. They shut off power to that facility as well. We can manage without it. But what the communication was, as you prioritize which facilities to bring back, bring those facilities back first if you can. So that's the type of relationship we have with PG&E in terms of coordination with them understanding which are our critical facilities. And so that communication is much better. We have more direct lines to people who can take action at PG&E, and they know our contacts as well. That helps a lot with coordination. But I do think there's always opportunities and to improve the coordination between us and PG&E. And I think it'd be a great idea for you to hear from PG&E. I can't speak for them.
Thank you. And Chair Joya, perhaps I will make a request that at some point we schedule an update from PG&E.
I've already noted that for when we talk about our future agenda items. I think that's a great suggestion. We've talked about that. That's great. So we will put that down. Councilmember Motoyama.
Thank you for the presentation. When you talked about the response about the post-emergency services MOU, you talked about critical main lines. And I was wondering, we are currently going through the Wildcat system upgrades here in El Cerrito. Does that mean that those are main lines and that we would have some more a higher level of protection here in El Cerrito now that those lines are new, or is that totally separate from sort of the emergency preparedness and hardening?
So that Wildcat, that's the Wildcat pipeline improvement. So that installed a parallel pipeline, parallel to a much older pipeline. That pipeline actually brings water from the Claremont Center that we talked about. So just to help orient yourself, if you've ever been to Zachary's Pizza on College Avenue, and Chabot Road, you go all the way up Chabot Road, we have our Claremont Center. That pipeline goes from that location all the way up to Crockett. And so it provides more reliable supply really for many communities from Oakland all the way up to Crockett. And that is a main transmission line. That's not where customers are connected into. That is a transmission pipeline.
So does that mean that our system is more reliable?
It definitely improves
And
reliability.
what does that mean specifically in El Cerrito?
Well, for El Cerrito and for the communities up into Crockett, it improves the reliability of moving, the large amounts of water up until Crockett.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Kelly.
Hi, Vice Mayor Chris Kelly from the City of Hercules. Much like Councilmember O'Keefe, I have a question about taking the reservoirs offline, and I understand why you do that. But during the Los Angeles fires, the public perception was something was wrong because one of the reservoirs was apparently taken offline. So the public also believes that we don't really we have fire seasons all the time now, and we have wet winters and dry winters. So should we here in Northern California experience a very dry winter, would you consider keeping some of those reservoirs more filled?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, we would evaluate that, and we would, depending on the season, we would do that, and then we would just have to manage the water quality locally at that particular reservoir, which takes more work to do, but we would do that. It's not our preference, but we would do that.
I understand, and just for the public, that might be a good thing for East Bay Mud to do, so that you don't get really criticized.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bana.
Thank you, Sohaila Bana, City of Richmond. First, I'd like to thank you for the presentation, good information, and being a very good community neighbor, stakeholder in terms of vegetation management, water quality, and everything. I really appreciate it. I have tons of questions. The good news is I reduced them to just a few. So, as I mentioned to you, there are many concerns about water pressure on the hills. So can I make a request for measurement of hydrants water pressure in very high and high fire hazard severity zones, at least in Richmond and El Sobrante, if possible, East Bay Hills. Is that doable?
Is people, just let us know, reach out to any of us, let us know the locations and we can help provide the pressure.
Maybe what we could do for all the jurisdictions is get some info about, I think it's a good general request to get along the wildfire zone is, you know, what the high severity fire zones are, where they are, is to actually do an evaluation of all the hydrants and maybe, and provide that. That would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe we can work together and see what you're looking for,
Okay.
and just,
We'll be happy to work with you.
And so, Helen, why don't you talk to me, and because I want to collect it from everybody, and then we could do run requests to them, this, because it's a great request, I think.
Sure,
And then we could do it and get it for all of us, for all the jurisdictions.
And if I may add to that, the number of fire hydrants. So I asked for a map of fire hydrants, for example, in a part of El Sobrante. I heard that there's regulation that they have to be within 300 feet of each other or less, but it was not maintained. So, and we don't know whose responsibility it is. It is the local government. Is it East Bay Mud? Is it the fire department? So in those areas, I think it'd be nice to get a map of the fire hydrants to make sure there are sufficient number of them.
Yeah, and when we met with Supervisor Joya, I mean, we showed him a map that showed all the, and the count of all the hydrants. So, I mean, we have the information. If you need to know.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah, please follow up with the information.
Thank you so much. One question residents haven't, we talked about it before, and East Bay Mud kept assuring us that you do have portable backup power. The problem is that in case of an evacuation, I mean, people always imagine the worst case, right? Everybody's evacuating. How could East Bay Mud staff go against the traffic and bring backup power to that water pump? It's impossible. So can we have backup power on the site?
So, yeah, I completely understand the concern. And again, for better or worse, we have a lot of experience. So, during one PSPS event at the same time, there was a fire in Lafayette, there was a fire in Crockett, where people were evacuating. Again, this is where we've done coordination with the fire departments. The fire departments, because this lasted multiple days, they gave us an escort into the location to refuel the tanks, because the tanks, depending on the operation, can last 1 to 3 days of fuel. They will need to be, it doesn't matter what generator you have. At some point, if the fire lasts long enough, you're going to refuel it. And that's where we have the experience and we have coordinated with the fire departments. That's just a very specific example where there was a facility in an area that people were evacuating, but in coordination with the fire department, they gave us an escort in to refuel the generator. So I think that is really the best solution, is to maintain that coordination, because again, it doesn't matter what you have out there. There is a circumstance where you might have to refuel. And if you don't have a plan to work together, that's when it becomes a problem. If you coordinate and you work together, then I think we're in a much better situation.
In this case, I trust you. So, better. My last comment is regarding expanding the existing fire breaks. For example, in Tilden Park, where East Bay Mud property is, there's a road, San Pablo Dam Road, running from El Sobrante to Orinda. It's not only an evacuation route, but also an existing fire break that separates the two parts of a very highly vegetated area. In Orinda, they've done an excellent job in terms of clearing the understory on both sides, but from Orinda all the way up to San Pablo Dam Road, none. We are asking, if possible, to take up the vegetation on both sides of the road to make it a safe evacuation route and an existing fire break.
And I would just say, please share that information with us. I mean, we can also talk to Mike Tognolini, who is responsible for all that. So just share the information. We're happy to work with you and talk to you about what you're asking for.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All really good questions. So we're going to turn to public comment, and because we still have a number of items, we're going to ask the public 1 minute public comment. If you have a question, we're not going to go back and forth and answer your question here. We'll take a note maybe at the end if there's some questions that can be answered. If not, we'll make sure we get answers. So public comment really on this, just on this presentation. So with that, feel free to come up to the mic. You can line up in front of the mic, identify yourself, and maybe Robert, me, or you should keep track of the time. I'll do it. I'll put my timer on. You got a timer? Okay.
Marlene Keller, resident of Cerrito, formerly grew up in Richmond, lived in Berkeley as a student. Thank you as a coalition. This is very important work. Two questions for East Bay Mud. Reflecting comments by members of the coalition. It is vital to residents of this area, voters, that we see proof of fire break work. We're talking about an online map. We need to see that. I walk daily through Wildcat Canyon and often through Tilden. We don't see evidence of a significant fuel break. So we can work on zone 0 for all the houses, but this is the big enemy. Second question is, when you overlay the new CAL FIRE risk maps, fire risk maps, it's very important if East Bay Mud can say to you and us, technically, from an engineering standpoint, what are the risks to their reservoirs, their generators, their lines, their main lines, from being inside a very high fire risk area? An example would be what they described as a diesel generator.
Can you please wrap up?
Near Caldecott Tunnel. Thank you.
Got it. And I'm noting these. Thank you.
Victor Abrams, Berkeley Fire Safe Council. Two perhaps technical things that might be with follow-up questions. One, the observation that the location of fire hydrants is also very valuable to Firewise communities to know what their local situation is. In fact, it should be reported as part of their application process. It also might be a good general thing to know about in terms of perhaps Firewise communities supporting adoptive fire hydrant programs for rush maintenance around fire hydrants visibility, replacing the poor little blue dot that gets knocked off.
You're saying adopt a fire hydrant.
Yes, as perhaps starting with Firewise communities as being very interested parties there. The other comment is with respect to East Bay. I appreciate East Bay Mud's presentation here. It's very interesting, and the system is a very interesting thing that we all should better understand. One issue, being a very large landowner along with East Bay Regional, is historically that's where the 23 Berkeley fire started in terms of grassland fire driven by Diablo winds at that time. I think likewise the 91 fire started not in an urban structure. So what the question is with respect to those two in particular large landowners, how respondent are the ignition detection systems over their large land holdings? Have there ever been any tests? What sort of measurements are there? The Keller fire was responded to very well, but backing up.
Time, can you please ask the question?
I think we got about the ignition, and there is for the ignition detection. There is, I know out in Wildcat, there is that out in Wildcat. We can talk about that separately with the fire agencies. Yes, yeah, good question. Yes, very good question.
Hi there, Macy Cornell, Montclair resident. I also volunteer with the Diablo Fire Safe Council and the Oakland Fire Safe Council. We are one of 6 Firewise communities in Oakland. And one of the things that we do as part of our Firewise group is inspect our fire hydrants. And I think that's kind of shocking to some residents that when they realize that fire hydrants are not being inspected on a regular basis. It's our understanding that it used to be done at some point in Oakland, and it was in collaboration with East Bay Mud and the fire department. But after speaking with several firefighters in various events, they have said that, East Bay Mud has kind of washed their hands of that activity. So I'm wondering, could we go back to having at least yearly inspections, especially in the hills? A lot of our hydrants, including in our neighborhood, we found are just covered in debris. And, I don't know how those are going to be operable if they're covered in vegetation. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Victoria Curtis. I'm a lifelong West County resident. John here in the front row and I were assigned to East Richmond Heights Municipal Advisory Committee over 5 years ago. And if you look back at our minutes, we've discussed this for 5 years, every single meeting, on getting backup generators for our local tanks. He's on the Arlington, I'm on Claremont, just north of Barrett. And we're looking for East Bay Mud and PG&E to set up backup generators at the Del Monte Reservoir and the Tasahara Carquinez Reservoir tank. We are also starting the Firewise program and we have a subcommittee starting. I'm not able to come to the March meeting, so I came today. But this is really, really important because I'm most concerned about the Wildcat Canyon Regional Park, which is just over the hill from us. So there's a fire there. It could come over the hill and just wipe out the whole hillside of East Richmond Heights all the way down.
And we'll have this on an agenda for the next East Richmond Municipal Advisory Council meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Good morning, Jim Hansen, California Plant Society East Bay Chapter. Just wanted to thank East Bay Mud. The coalition has made a commitment to ecologically sound vegetation management practices, which not only conserve the natural beauty, but do a better job at protecting us against wildfire. And East Bay Mud has worked with the Native Plant Society, for instance, on the Fish Ranch Road, where we left the ferns. In some cases, there's excessive clearance, and that's produced weeds. And they've helped by keeping some of that native understory low, the existing native understory. And so these are the kinds of things that I think as we refine what we do, really make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Henry De Niro, Berkeley Fire Safe Council. I can't resist another shout out for East Bay Mud. They're a forerunner here. They removed 750 eucalyptus trees from a 13-acre plot called Skyline Gardens about 8 or 10 years ago. They left 2 groves of eucalyptus trees. They've cleaned up the understory and maintained them so a fire on the ground will not climb into the canopy. And volunteers now come into that plot and remove invasives repeatedly. And it has completely changed the landscape. It's ecologically sound and it's fire safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, public comment from Zoom participants? Can we ask, they can raise their hand. I do see Gary Prost. He didn't raise his hand with El Cerrito Fire Safe. So no questions on Zoom? Okay. East Bay Mud, thanks for this presentation. What we're going to do is post it. I think there's a number of follow-up things we may talk about, including the comment about the hydrants from Councilmember Bonner. Some of these questions I did want to that we'll get answers to. One of the maybe looking to the El Cerrito Fire Chief. What's the current legal requirement about inspection of hydrants? And are you the right person to ask on that?
I'll comment on it. I don't know if I'm exactly the right person, but as far as I know, the legal requirement to inspect hydrants is not within the fire department's responsibility, although most fire departments do inspect fire hydrants in their district, flow them and test them and clear them out, because hydrants have a tendency to build up sediment inside of them and some rust, and that rust will clog our fire engines. So you'll periodically see engines stopping and opening up hydrants and flowing them to get all that sediment out. And I can tell you that El Cerrito does an annual inspection of flowing and inspecting all of our hydrants, which is a major factor to our ISO 1 rating.
Got it. And so just to summarize, Clifford, what's East Bay Mud's role with hydrant inspections?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just put it simply. I mean, we do have responsibility for maintaining the hydrants. I think that is done in coordination depending on the fire departments. As far as flow testing it, that can happen. It is challenging in certain areas. For example, in Orinda, where you have no storm drains, no curbs, if you flow a hydrant, you're going to flood people's homes. So there are considerations. So flow tests don't happen, as frequently as us getting out there and maintaining it. There was the other comment about the vegetation and dirt around the hydrants. Many of the hydrants are either on personal property or public rights of way. And so that is something that we have to work with the cities and counties for, them to maintain that area around it. We have gone through in the past year in all the high fire risk areas, inspected all those hydrants, identified locations where there's a lot of dirt and vegetation, and we'll be reaching out to the various cities and counties to work with them on maintaining clearance around the hydrant.
Right. Great. Thanks. What we're going to do also is try to create a space on the website to have answers to questions. And then that way, some of the questions that have come up that are generally, I think there's a lot of general public interest in some of these same questions, and then we could actually post some information that answers those as well. So thanks. All right, we're going to move on to item 5. Next 3 items should go pretty quickly. Item 5 is approval of vegetation management grant proposal. We had extensive discussion on this at a previous meeting. Basically approved it in concept, but said, let's get input from the fire chiefs. And we did, and there were some modifications, fine tuning of it from the fire chief. So the version before us incorporates the fire chief's edits to it. So, John, did you want to just briefly talk about that? And then we could take any questions and vote on this with the idea that we're going to seek funding for this proposal.
Correct. Yes. My name is John Kaufman. I'm acting as staff to your coalition. As the supervisor just said, you had a pretty extensive discussion of this at the November meeting with the consultants present to answer questions. So I'll be very brief and just summarize for the benefit of the new members of your coalition. Last year, the Alliance of Fire Safe Councils proposed that the coalition undertake a vegetation management planning effort so that the ground would be laid for the individual agencies to implement vegetation management in their respective communities. And the coalition had last year then made two priorities for its actions. One is vegetation management and the other is—
Put the mic up further close to you.
Oh, sorry. The coalition has established two priorities. One is vegetation management, and the other is home hardening and defensible space. And we'll learn more about that in the coming days. The vegetation management plan before you is a proposal for a plan, and that is up for your approval today. I want to just ask you if you approve it to make one amendment. There is a typo on the page having to do with the first proposal. It's the bottom of page 3, the phrase "in low end budget scenario, 4 to 10 pages in high end emergency scenario." We've modified the proposal, but we left in that phrase. So whoever moves to approve the proposal, if you would include that.
What are we including? What's the correction, John?
Okay, it's at the
I'm
bottom
looking at
of
it. It says
page
3 to 4
3.
pages in low end budget scenario, 7 to 10 pages in high end budget scenario. What's changing?
We eliminate the high end budget alternative.
Got it.
So the 4 to 10 pages in high end budget scenario, that should be
Delete
deleted.
that. Okay, so just the 3 to 4 pages in low end budget scenario. Okay.
So if
Got it.
you, I'm happy to answer any questions about the proposal itself. But the next step would be, following your approval today, we would present this proposal for funding to various parties that have already expressed an interest in helping us get it funded.
Great. Thanks, John. Any questions or comments on this? Yes.
Thank you so much, John, for your work on this. I know this was one of the original goals for wanting to have regional vegetation management plan, and I'm very excited that this can be implemented soon. Just one quick question, as I was on maternity leave when this proposal was being discussed end of last year. What is the proposed timeline for once the consultant is selected, and is there a target end date or month, year?
Yeah, the actual work in developing the plan would be under a year. The first step, however, is getting funding. We need to find $650,000 through the state. I don't know how long that process will take, but once that is done and the consultants are selected, we will then proceed to work, and I think we can do it within a year. And the idea here is this will be an expedited proposal so that it will really move quickly and then set the stage so that cities like Oakland can go ahead and implement plans without having to do the long environmental process that I know Oakland went through last year.
And thank you. And one follow-up question, is there an idea at the moment for a bidding process for this contract? Would there be a RFQ set up, or would it just be an informal outreach to consultants who might already do this work?
No, we would follow the state law in terms of, because it's obviously going to be state money that gets involved. And so we'll follow that process. We did work with consultants to draft the proposal, but this proposal is from the coalition. It's not from consultants, so that we want to look for bidders who are both qualified to do the work and within our budget.
Thank you.
And if the Contra Costa Consolidated Fire District ends up being the fiscal agent for this group and ends up being then the applicant, we'd have to follow whatever process a that public agency would have. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to ask questions. I'm a new member, so I just want to understand the context better. So first thing is, El Cerrito has a hillside natural area vegetation management plan that was funded by the Coastal Conservancy, and it's very comprehensive. So is there a part of this proposal that takes into account actually existing plans and existing reports, and how are they worked into this proposal?
Yeah, thank you for your question. This would be a supplemental in addition to whatever each individual jurisdiction has going. And the idea is to enable communities that haven't gone through the SUCLA process to use this, but also to enable those that have gone through the process to do additional work that might not have been covered by their individual process. So it's supplemental and in no way will interfere with the work that El Cerrito, for example, is currently doing.
So there's, just so I understand, there's no redundancy in that work.
Correct. Yes. And can we put the map up that shows the area that would be covered? It's basically the area from Merlin North down to Castro Valley in the south on the west side of the hills. That's not covered by East Bay Mud and the other agencies that are doing their own work.
Okay. And my second question is, in this proposal, there's a great deal of effort to do the historical and pre-colonial mapping and study, and that seems very expensive. And I was just wondering why that is such a big portion of this proposal.
Yeah, we actually cut it back. We cut their budget in half from what they originally proposed, and we used that money to provide more resources to individual jurisdictions for the CEQA work that's required as the proposal moves forward. That was a suggestion that was made by the fire chiefs following the November meeting, and we incorporated in the draft that you have before you now.
And just so I understand, what is the purpose of the historical information in terms of current fire mitigation?
It's not directly related, but it gives us a good idea of what the area was like before people settled this area and before a lot of the vegetation that we now have, like the eucalyptus trees, were planted. So we have the context in which to proceed.
Thank you.
Sohaila? Councilmember Bana?
Thank you. So John, I just wanted to say thank you for all you have done. You and Sue Piper started the vision of having this local government coalition. I sincerely appreciate that, all the work you have done, and then along with Lisa, Elizabeth, Sue, the rest of us at grassroots level brought it to this level. Thank you so much. It's greatly appreciated. And we'll be supporting what you're doing because after all, we're one community, either as grassroots or as local governments. Just wanted to say it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Council member?
O'Keefe. Yes. So I'm new to this process and I want to ask a question that I'm not sure you can answer. But I would like to just maybe express curiosity about how effective this EIR documentation process, how effective do we think it will be? Because I know CEQA, there's always going to be a lawsuit and there's always some questions. And I'm curious, like how confident you are that this is going to solve that problem.
I'm extremely confident simply because we now have had enough wildfires under our belt in recent years so that we know the severity of this problem. And we know that we have to move forward in compliance with the law. But I think it's clear now, at least from the public side, that we have to make progress. And CEQA is our friend in the sense that they want us to do things according to law and respecting people's rights and responsibilities. But I think there's an understanding we have to make the process work.
So just to be clear, what I would like to do is point to this plan as a solution to that problem when it comes up. And you're confident that I can say, this is our solution?
It's, solving the wildfire problem takes a lot of different things. As we heard, it takes water pressure, but it also takes vegetation management, as Mr. Katz reminded us at the beginning, that we need to not only fight fires, but we need to prevent them. So all of that is important.
Yeah. Sorry, I just meant the problem of CEQA challenges to vegetation management. That is an issue I hear about a lot, and this is the solution. Sounds like. So thank you.
We want to solve it, and we think this proposal is an expedited way to solve it.
Great. Good question. I mean, because the Park District's had challenges when it did its plan. Yes, yes. And I'm gonna urge us to try to move along because we have a major presentation from Berkeley Fire. I was hoping this wouldn't take too long. Go ahead, Director.
I just wanted to say that I think we needed your earlier presentation. And thank you for coming back, that you were saying that this information that's being put together, the redundancy isn't there, where you have a plan that's good, but this would help you expedite your own proposals for funding and make you more effective in getting money and doing your own vegetation management that you need to do in every fire prevention.
Right. And by the way, on the Contra Costa side, our Measure X sales tax does allocate $4.5 million a year for clearing for various vegetation management, or I should say, clearing hand crews that clear vegetation, as well as a grant program for property owners who may not have funding to do that. That's on the, I know there may be something on the Alameda County side, but I'm speaking on the Contra Costa side at least. All right, public comment on this item. 1 minute, please. And we want to get to vote on this and move on quickly here.
Hi, John Sargent, Chair of the East Richmond Heights MAC. So John, after seeing this, this has nothing to do with our Wildcat Canyon Fuel Break grant that we did not get last year. Is that correct?
Right, this is separate.
Okay.
This is a broader study. Yes.
Okay. I'm
Yes,
hoping that
right.
we will still continue to
Yes,
pursue that.
yeah, doesn't replace the need to do individual projects. Correct, John. Yeah.
Henry De Niro again, Berkeley Fire Safe. So speaking for the Alliance, which are 6 fire safe organizations, Oakland, Claremont Canyon, Berkeley, El Cerrito, West Contra Costa County, 2 members from Claremont Canyon. I'd like to resubmit the recommendations we made to you back in June, the first 4 of which were vegetation management. They're very consistent with your strategic objectives. I'll just reiterate those 4. Clean up the understory of the eucalyptus groves and any other groves that may carry fire into the canopy and have the same ember cast, and maintain those groves until step 2 is taken. Long term, systematically remove the eucalyptus and other hazardous trees, replacing them with non-hazardous species in an ecologically sound restoration process. That will take decades. 3, short-term strict inspection and enforcement of defensible space in the cities with zone 0 requirement for high and very high severity fire zones. That's an add from the June recommendations. And 4, and this is a medium term, get widespread adoption of home hardening, which can only be done through significant financial incentives to homeowners. A bond measure with a property tax credit, a 0 interest loan program, some mass program that will get hundreds, if not thousands of people to harden their homes. These are essential, and we think this is the backbone of the vegetation management defensible space portion of preventing a catastrophic fire. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on Zoom? Don't see any on Zoom. All right, we have the proposal here. Is there a motion and a second? Note that.
I second it if
Is
nobody.
there a motion? You want to make your second a motion?
Okay.
Your motion from Councilmember Rivana, second by Director Bowman. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That item passes. All right. Item 6 is approval of government affairs communications position. This is something that came out of a discussion with former Councilmember Wengraf, who's here. She was very involved in in the effort to establish this group and the MOU process, and was, of course, our first chair last year, and has offered to, at the reasonable cost of $5,000 for a year out of the $25,000 that we have available, and to assist us. And you'll see the proposal here, which is basically to develop sort of newsletters, work with us on sort of making more visible the work that we do, and it's spelled out in our proposal here, and to also continue to work with us with local government representatives. And I know you're doing this as much for your continued commitment for this, for our efforts. And did you want to say a few words, Susan, just briefly? And we can take any questions and comment and then vote.
Thank you for the opportunity. Some of you know that I was involved in the formation of this group from the very beginning. And as Supervisor Joya said, I served as chair when we launched. And then I retired from the Berkeley City Council after 16 years. And the way this group is structured, once you are no longer an elected official, you really have no role. But my heart and my brain are very much involved in this organization, and I very much want to see it succeed. I'm very committed to a regional approach to this threat. And so I did some soul searching and thought, well, how can I best help this organization succeed? And knowing my skill set, I came up with this proposal. I thought that it was really important for the rest of the world to know who we are. We sort of are.
And when you say the rest of the world, mostly in the East Bay, you're really talking.
East Bay,
Yes.
yes, but
Just to be clear.
so who knows?
Right.
You know, we are kind of functioning in a vacuum, and I thought it would be really useful for your constituencies to know what we are doing, because you are representing them on this board, and for your colleagues to know, and also word would get out about the work that we're doing. So that was the sort of origin of the newsletter concept, and I've produced, I think, very good newsletters over the years. I think some of you maybe have seen them over time, but it's something that I'm very comfortable doing, and I think I can deliver a very good product. And then, you know, I thought, well, my God, you know, I have 16 years. Actually, I have 32 years, because before I was on the council, I was a legislative aide to the former council member. I've developed a lot of relationships, and it's all about relationships. And I think part of bringing in some of those partner agencies was based on my relationships with those agencies. So I thought I could continue in that role and try to be the government liaison, and at the same time unify our message, because with all of us out there, we need to make sure that we have a unified message. And working with the chair, the vice chair, and Supervisor Joya's staff, I thought we could begin crafting some messaging. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
I just want to make a comment as the Berkeley representative. So I represent the district adjacent to Councilmember Wengraff's former district. So this is
Yes.
not, my constituents are not her constituents.
Right.
And yet I heard over and over again on the campaign trail how good your newsletters were. So a lot of people said, you should do newsletters, and you should look at Wengraff's newsletters. They're very good, multiple times. So
The
she's
first
good.
one was excellent, Joshua.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. And I'm encouraging us to try to vote on this, because we have a big presentation from Berkeley Fire.
It's fat.
Right.
Caring plus connections goes a long way. So I wonder, you only talk about local governments and fire officials. I wonder if we can add other stakeholders, like we talked about requesting East Bay Mud to provide some information. Would that be something you could help us with, because it's collaboration? So I suggest, instead of fire official, just like other stakeholders.
as needed.
So, yeah, thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Motoyama. Not sure your mic's on.
And I used to be one of your constituents when I lived in Berkeley a long time ago. So I was wondering, just for my context, like what is the source of the funding? And I guess is the source require any kind of RFP or anything like that?
Yeah, and a lot of the funding that's left over, some of it's from the Air District. John, you were involved in the early effort. Do you want to talk about that? There's still Air District air quality funds we haven't fully expended as part of this.
Yeah, it all gets mixed together.
Right.
So I'm not sure where the funds come from, but we started out getting some private donations from individuals. We got an early round of funding from the various members of your coalition. They each contributed a set amount based on their population, which is again going to be the formula for this year's funding. We've gotten money from the Coastal Conservancy through the Bay Area Council Economic Forum. Thank you.
Right.
And the Air District, as John mentioned.
And those don't, given the amount and those sources, we're not required to do an RFP.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Public comment under a minute. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Here's another question. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to say that I'm really happy to see this before us because it is a critical position that we do need, that we ourselves don't have time to do. And that with
I know it's taken my office a lot of time preparing for this meeting, and that's the one thing you'll see as chair and the vice chair. Hopefully we'll get help, but it takes time to put a lot of this together. Yes. All right, public comment. All right, no public comment on Zoom. Any comment? Yes, please come on up and identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Holly Million, and I'm the Executive Director of Diablo Fire Safe Council. And I just wanted to make a very brief announcement that we're updating the RPP for Alameda County and Contra Costa County right now, and also the Alameda County CWPP. And I haven't yet been at any of these meetings. We're on the advisory board, but I just wanted to welcome anybody who is in Alameda County who wants to give comment on the CWPP to please contact us.
Okay.
And we're also soliciting proposals for the RPP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are having public comment at the end for non-agenda items. So is there a motion on this item?
Approval.
And is there a second? Motion and a second. We'll let Berkeley second. So have a yes. We'll do a motion and second that way. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, item passes. Trying to get us through this to get the Berkeley Fire presentation. Item 7, election of vice chair. So the original chair of this group was Councilmember Wengraf, and the vice chair is my colleague from Oakland, Councilmember Ramachandran. And I was elected chair at a previous meeting upon the retirement of our Berkeley council member. And I will make a comment. I strongly believe that the vice chair should be from a different county than the chair. Originally, there was the chair and vice chair were from Alameda County. I'm now the chair from Contra Costa County. And I know Councilmember Ramachandran, who was vice chair, took a leave and is now back. I was going to suggest, you have an interest in remaining as vice chair. I think that would be great for consistency and eventually rotate into chair and keep this practice of one from each county. I think that makes sense for a 2-county group. So if we're good with that, if there's no comment, I'm willing to make a motion to select Councilmember Ramachandran as the vice chair.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, is there any public comment? All right, hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And it will come in handy today because I have to leave before this meeting ends unfortunately for a memorial for Pastor Lawson, Reverend Lawson, whose older brother passed away. There was a great obituary about his brother in the New York Times last year who worked with Dr. King. His younger brother, Phil Lawson, who was, of course, he's resident of Hercules and used to be at Easter Hill in Richmond. And so I will be going there. But we'll get through as much as we can while I'm still here. Since one item I wanted to be here for is just on not on the agenda items for future meetings, but on future meetings. We did look check with the city of El Cerrito on availability. We talked about meeting, I think it was every other month. And if folks are fine with every other month, and again, we prefer in person, but if you participate remotely, we just have to publish your agenda or location. So in terms of, let me just pull up here, if we're looking at possible dates, maybe we just look at April and June. I looked at what was available from El Cerrito and then to use these chambers. Thank you, Lisa. And also my schedule. We're looking at possibly Thursday, April 17th, again in the morning. Does that work for individuals?
Yes.
Thursdays don't work for you. Okay. So we may have to go back and get other, and the other date they provided, I know was a Wednesday, but that's I have air district meetings on Wednesday. So we may have to go back and then do it by email to determine future days. So Thursdays don't work for you, correct? Thursday mornings don't work. Okay. But afternoons, yeah. But we asked for mornings, right, Robert?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Rather than take up our time here, we're going to do it. We'll have to do it by email to folks to set up. We're not going to take 10 minutes to look at everybody's calendar. We don't know what El Cerrito's other days El Cerrito has, so we'll do it by email.
Are we going to talk about the agenda before you leave?
That'll be, we'll do, you can do, yes, you want to do that briefly, just ideas for future meetings?
New LRA
We're going to take a list and then I'll confer with the vice chair and figure out how we agendize all these things. Got it.
So the new LRA maps are out. I think it'd be great if you could invite CAL FIRE to have a presentation about how they did it and ask our own fire departments to talk about what they're going to do about it. There are many questions about the new LRA maps that have shrunk the very high fire hazard severity zone areas. And I also would like to suggest to invite PG&E and question them about their equipment safety and maintenance. They have not been providing reports to us yet.
Okay. Any others? And then I think when this item comes up, you can take public comment on this if there's others from the public. All right, because I want to move us to Chief Sprague, presentation by Berkeley Fire on Zone Zero efforts. And also in the package are a couple of articles that we thought would be helpful, which have really talked about Berkeley's, some of Berkeley's work on Zone Zero. We also have the executive order from the state. So there's some other materials that were attached here to your package. So with that, thank you very much. And I know we did attach this as well to the agenda materials. And it's on the web. And I think there was also a great op-ed that was done by the chief. We didn't put that in the package about fire. We can do that as well.
Yeah, he did a great job. I am not Chief Sprague. I'm Assistant Chief Arnold, but I will do my best to carry his energy forward.
Great.
Thank you very much for having us. Is this a PowerPoint or is this PDF that you've got on your side? Cool. PDF sounds good. This will be a brief recap of a presentation we did to our city council earlier this month. The backstory there is that after LA hit, we developed a relationship with a number of city council members led by retired city council member Susan Wengraff, who was supposed to be retired, by the way, to talk about what we could potentially do locally to combat the number of wildfires that continue to happen regardless of what it seems that we're doing publicly. So this presentation is a modified version of that. Obviously, what we saw in Los Angeles is heartbreaking. A number of us went down to that community to help out. The rest of us wanted to go down. And in lieu of that, we saw this as an opportunity to talk about some of the best science that's out there that we have, what we're learning from LA, and unfortunately lessons that we have continued to learn from other jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So in the Western United States, I think it's clear that we have lost control of wildfire. And I think control there is an important term. We have talked at length about suppression efforts, about aircraft, about vegetation management, about a number of other things, generally under the capacity of what do we do to prevent wildfire from occurring. I think it's widely understood now that the Forest Service approach to suppressing all wildfires to less than 10 acres was not a good strategy. Prior to our settling the area and engaging in fire suppression efforts, there is a long history of fire regularly occurring in the landscape and the landscape regenerating. And then at a certain point here in the turn of the century, we started to suppress fires from the landscape. And that suppression has led to both a reduction in the amount of fuel that is burned regularly, along with climate change. And what climate change has done here in the East Bay has substantially reduced the number of rainy days we have. So even though we get the same traditional amount of rainfall, they have been compressed to a certain number of days, leaving many more dry days, leaving many more days when those northeast or northwest winds are blowing, northeast and easterly winds are blowing when it's not also raining. And so that reduction in humidity to the landscape has made those days much more impactful. You can go on to the next slide, please. So maintaining the status quo will continue to result in similar outcomes. I think this is an important slide to point out. There's a number of different ways you can stratify these wildfires, but suffice to say that they continue to happen. LA was both a surprise, but also should not be surprising because we see this every year. The state of California experiences over 8,000 wildfires a year. Many of them occur in far less extreme conditions than we see in Los Angeles. We know that the fire will eventually impact the Berkeley Hills again and the rest of the East Bay Hills. The last major event was in 1991, which was over 30 years ago. These fires have historically occurred every 20 years. So we know we're due. Next slide, please. So our desired end state in Berkeley, if you look at this as an equation, it might look something like this. There's three major categories that require action in order to have the best chance at minimizing loss. And that's things that we can do ahead of the event, things that we can do when fire weather is forecasted, and things that we can do after a fire ignites. The goal with the Ember proposal in Berkeley is to address all three of those, both to reiterate things that we're currently doing, as well as to talk about things that should be done. Next slide, please. What that looks like for us in Berkeley is initially increase our focus on Panoramic Hill in the area of east of Grizzly Peak Boulevard. For those that aren't familiar with Panoramic Hill, the Cal Stadium, it is up and to the right of that. So it's a one-way in, one-way out, limited access road with high density housing surrounded by unburned vegetation. Grizzly Peak Boulevard, we've got a stretch of land between Grizzly Peak Boulevard and then further to the east, Wildcat Canyon Road. And that encompasses about 700 homes or so. What Ember proposes to do is to remove anything combustible within 5 feet of structures, implement home hardening measures to align the older building stock with modern code, and to move forward with parking restrictions under the Safe Passages Act. That first point of removing anything combustible within 5 feet is an implementation of Zone 0. And our goal is to do a strict implementation of Zone 0, and we'll briefly discuss why we presented that as important to the public. Next slide, please. We wanted to also include some of the research that's been done about fire pathways and entry points. And you can go to the next slide. This is modeling done by Xyloplan. Xyloplan was contracted to do work under the Alameda County Coordinator work under a grant from the California Fire Safe Foundation. What this modeling shows is where the most likely points are for a conflagration to affect the surrounding area, which is to say that in some of these areas, a fire that starts in there and spreads contiguously to neighborhoods or to homes around it is much more likely to create further devastation downstream or downwind. The darker reds here, the darker red areas are areas where if those houses ignite, they have a much higher implication of igniting homes to their east. And especially important here is that a number of homes igniting can exceed the capacity of the firefighting response, which is to say that our primary concern, we address fires every day on a single structure basis. However, those fires generally take 5 or so engines to put out. So when we are spread thin, it becomes much more difficult to stop a fire based on weather conditions. Next slide, please. What this same software models is what a likely fire spread would be like through the urban area of Berkeley. So there's a lot of modeling out there that talks about fuel load and fire spread in native vegetation or just in vegetation in general. That vegetative analysis is fairly common. However, this is one of the first times that we've started to see that modeling spread into structures. What you're looking at here is the initial movement of fire from the vegetative landscape into the urban environment. And then what happens at 30, 60, and 90 minutes later without additional work done by the community, which is to say that a fire entry point in certain parts of our city, once they begin to expand, have exponentially larger effects on the community. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is the challenge, the initial conversation about the challenge to the community, which is to say that as mitigations go up, risk initially does not go down. Any one resident doing some work doesn't affect the greater community for the reasons that we saw on the previous slide, which is that because we have conflagration blocks, if I do a tremendous amount of work in my home, but my neighbor does not, the exposure to my home by my neighbor's home burning is more than any of the measures that I put into effect. What we need to do is reach a certain mitigation threshold where risk starts to go down. So once we reach about 80%, so once we see about 80% of communities or 80% of homes doing the work that needs to be done with defensible space and home hardening, we begin to see a reduction in community risk. You can go on to the next slide. I'll talk briefly about why that's the case. So fire seeks the path of least resistance. It's looking for the weakest link. It's opportunistic, which is to say that if 15% of the community does the risk mitigation strategies, the fire will still make its way through the remainder of the community because it will find that path of least resistance, and any single home that's done the work will not otherwise be resilient. So we need to find that 80% mark where the community immunity, if you will, has created a buffer to support the remaining community. Next slide, please. Also important to talk about is the value of insurance mitigation or insurance valuation on mitigation. And I talked a little bit about 80%. I also talked about community immunity, and I want to talk about where that comes from. The mitigations performed at a distance from a structure do little to reduce the risk of structure loss without other interventions. And mitigations that matter must be performed on enough homes in a neighborhood to significantly reduce the risk of structure loss. What that is saying is that focusing on the vegetative model without addressing the structure model will not adequately protect structures. If we do nothing around our homes and we focus on the vegetation around our homes or in the regional park or in areas outside of our immediate neighborhood, our homes will still burn. We have to also and primarily address the structures and the defensible space around them in order for any other work that we do, which is also important work, to be effective. I want to show where that comes from. Go ahead, next slide, please. Two studies here that I'm going to hack my way through because I was not a part of writing them, but I'd like to thank retired Chief Dave Winokur for the work that he did in modeling these. We're going to talk briefly about both of them, but I'm going to focus on the Town of Paradise, which was a resiliency challenge grant that looked at insurance valuation of Paradise both before the campfire and then what could have happened afterwards. Next slide, please. What we're looking at here is the value of insurance savings to a given property based on mitigation. The areas in red are the most likely to benefit from defensible space and home hardening if 80% of the community does the work. On the right is a thought experiment that was done by the same group, which said if we took all of the areas around Paradise and we mitigated the risk as best we can through addressing the fuel models without looking at defensible space and home hardening, what would be the outcome for Paradise then? So in one side you have, let's focus on defensible space and home hardening. On the other, let's ignore defensible space and home hardening and look strictly at the vegetative fuel model. What they found in this thought experiment, and it is just a thought experiment because in no capacity does Paradise have the funding to do fuel mitigation in the surrounding environment. What they found is that addressing the fuels in the vegetative landscape without addressing the urban area resulted in a 20% reduction in risk and 20% reduction in loss, whereas addressing the residents or addressing the properties or the values at risk and focusing on those represented an 80% reduction in risk. Another way to say that is that 20% of the work comes from the surrounding area, and that 20% is only effective if you first address the structures themselves. So those two go hand in hand. You cannot address a reduction in loss simply by looking at the vegetative landscape. It is an important part of the process, and there's a number of entities in this room that have done a lot of work towards addressing the vegetative fuel and those issues, and that is a very important part of the conversation. But that is not effective if we don't look at defensible space and home hardening. Next slide, please. So the same areas that were dark red in the previous slide now start to also reflect in dark blue, which is the largest increase in, or the largest decrease in annual average loss in insurability. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I want to talk about what Berkeley is doing to get us where we're at today. Next slide. So this is normally an hour-long presentation that I'm going to hack through very quickly here because I think a number of folks are probably interested, but there's other things that we could be focused on. We've removed 7,000 cubic yards of combustible vegetation. We've distributed home hardening mesh to about 120 households. We're modifying 110 acres of public land that serves as evacuation routes and strategic fuel breaks, such as Grizzly Peak Boulevard and Wildcat Canyon Road, where we're currently working. And then this year, we're going to begin to leverage a $1 million CAL FIRE grant to provide vegetation assistance to residents who need it. Our inspection program has resulted in 21,000 individual inspections that have resulted in 11,000 violations, 9,000 of which have been corrected by homeowners. Those are a lot of really great sounding numbers. The challenge is that we're applying this to 9,000 households throughout the entire Berkeley Hills. And what we're finding is that that pace and that progress just simply isn't enough. Next slide, please. So it's really easy to feel as if this is an insurmountable problem that will take too much effort, emotional capital, and money to address. And it's easy to feel powerless or to feel that power lines should be undergrounded or that we should be focusing solely on the park district before we take any action. And while each one of those is a worthwhile effort that is a part of solving this problem, one thing that we are highlighting is that all of the evidence and the science suggests that the number one place that we can be effective at the lowest cost is on the individual parcels starting closest to the values at risk, which would be the properties themselves. Next slide. So what we are proposing to amend the Berkeley Fire Code with is the establishment of Berkeley Fire Zone 4, which is a poorly named number because it also sounds like Zone 0, Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. So we are working on the renaming structure. But what this would do is create a zone between Grizzly Peak Boulevard and Wildcat Canyon Road. This, along with Panoramic Hills, would represent our two highest areas of risk from wildfire loss. Within these areas, we would adopt a strict interpretation of Zone 0 that eliminates all combustible material within the first 5 feet of the structure. And then we would also work with chief sailors on quantifying the negative, which is a process by which we look not at the amount of value that is lost from a wildfire, but from the amount of value that is saved from mitigation efforts by residents and other partners to save property. Next slide, please. So while we can reduce the risk of wildfire spreading on the ground by managing vegetation and removing flammable materials around homes, embers remain a significant challenge. And to truly protect a home, it must be hardened to resist both fire and embers. We know that only 50 homes were built in the fire zone that we're discussing since 2008. when the state building code was modified to include requirements to harden homes. And this set of proposals would charge the planning and fire department to bring back, as a part of the normal triennial code adoption process, a set of proposals to improve the ember resistance of structures in Berkeley's fire zones. We know that some of these modifications can be expensive, so we will also be coming back with proposals to create incentives and other funding mechanisms to assist residents in completing that work. And that work is well underway in terms of establishing those funds. In San Rafael, for instance, they provide a $7,500 incentive to eliminate wood shake roofs, of which they have now eliminated the majority that were there before the proposal. Next slide, please. The final part of the Ember proposal focuses on assumptions that we believe will soon be validated by the evacuation time study we're doing. And said simply, that is that we cannot rely on the Berkeley infrastructure and road network to evacuate folks at the rate at which a wildfire can spread under extreme conditions. And so what we are continuing to propose is that we advocate for a process that we're calling the Leave Early campaign, which is that under very specific circumstances, we encourage residents to leave the hills before an emergency occurs, under the assumption that once that wildfire starts under those conditions, the hills cannot be evacuated quickly enough. Next slide, please. So I want to come back and briefly talk about each one of those three proposals and what they look like. So Zone 0 and home hardening. These are two interlocking pieces of protecting structures from the effects of wildfire. And I want to quote something. I want to quote the Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS. And they're if you're not aware, they're a nonprofit research firm that's done much of the experimentation. You hear us say this again, that something is not better than nothing. So in order for this to be effective, Zone 0 and home hardening need to both be adopted fully. That is 5 feet around the structure, nothing combustible. That is not 2 feet around the structure with some plants that I really love. That is 5 feet around the structure with nothing combustible, and combine that with home hardening. If it's going to be worth the effort, both of those things have to be done completely. Anything less than that, we are looking at a partial implementation that has not been shown to be effective, that does not support the science that the insurance industry is currently using. Next slide, please. We're looking at a PDF. So we'll look at this black screen for a moment. But what I'd like to share is that there's a number of experiments that have been done out there, and a number of videos that have also been shared that look at both home hardening and defensible space. And what we can very easily establish is that if you don't have 5 feet of defensible space around a structure, and oftentimes that's mulch or vegetation, it can be lawn furniture, it can be piles of wood, all of those represent opportunities for embers to come in, find receptive fuel beds, and ignite. Another really important part is our wooden fences that come up and connect the structures. There are some really great examples out there of fires. There's one out of Texas, actually, that show fire a good distance from the house. And that fire ignites a wooden fence, and that fence becomes a wick. Once that wooden fence is ignited, the fire works its way up the fence and right up to the structure. So also a part of Zone 0 are those wooden fences. And one of the things that we are proposing is to remove wooden fences when they're within 5 feet of a structure. That doesn't mean that you need to remove your fence. It means that you need to create a buffer where that fence can burn up to 5 feet and not otherwise take the rest of your house down. One of the interesting things that we're seeing out of LA is a lot of video footage. And there's some, if you go through and you watch some of this video, I would challenge you to find a video that does not show a ember fire starting that takes down a structure, or a fence fire that then takes down a structure as well. This is not a wall of fire moving through our community. This is an ember storm ahead of a community, finding receptive fuel beds, starting small fires that otherwise would not be a big deal, that are then fanned into larger fires, and then individually taking out homes. We don't see that because we're not there. But when we look at it the next morning, we see widespread destruction. But firefighters on the ground will tell you they're dealing with a fire over here, and a fire over here, and a fire over here. And because we can't get to all of those fires in a timely manner, they continue to spread to other structures. And that is how a wildfire moves through a community. Next slide, please. I can show you this photo, which is from the Kincaid fire in 2019 in Sonoma County. This is showing how the landscape around a home supports the fire resistive qualities of that home and aids in the firefight. So in this case, it's a retaining wall that stopped the body of fire from moving up to the home. And then what you can't see is within the first 5 feet of the home, there's very little receptive fuel beds so that embers can hit the side of the house, fall to the ground, and self-extinguish on the ground before they ignite anything else. Next slide, please. We do have some good examples of this in Berkeley. So here's a home within the new fire zone that is making use of a similar retaining wall. There's limited vegetation around the base of that retaining wall. And then inside that retaining wall, between the retaining wall and the structure, is a validated zone 0 or 5 feet of non-combustible space. There's still work to be done in areas like this, but there are great examples of success. Next slide, please. There are also great examples of beautifully maintained homes where residents do a lot of work that still represent threats to those structures. These are two big challenges for Berkeley. On the left is a home where the vegetation is being used to provide some level of visual protection, I assume, from the busy street below. On the right is just a classic Berkeley house that is up at the top of Grizzly Peak, where the resident is obviously doing a lot of work to maintain the property. But both of these represent significant challenges from a firefighting perspective. Those are both very receptive fuel beds around that house. And once those ignite, they ignite the home. Once that home ignites, it doesn't matter how much work the adjacent neighbors do in an urban landscape to protect their homes. These homes generate enough heat that they will start fires through exposure to properties nearby. This is where our CAL FIRE grant comes in. That $1 million CAL FIRE grant will provide 300 residents or more with services related to vegetation work and removing threats around homes. And with the nature of the grant, they need to be either medically or financially capable of doing the work themselves. So we do look forward to being able to leverage that grant towards this. Next slide, please. The other important piece of this is home hardening. As I mentioned before, when coupled with Zone 0, this is the most effective way to prevent home ignition. There's a lot of measures that can be done, some of them fairly cheaply, to harden your home. Berkeley has a program right now where we are distributing ember-resistant mesh to cover all openings on your homes, including your gutters, to the new zone currently, which is east of Grizzly Peak Boulevard. And I believe we're expanding that this week over to Panoramic Hill. And then as we have capacity, we'll continue to expand that into our fire zones. But there's a number of other things that need to be done as well. So fire resistive siding, Class A roofs, non-combustible decking, the first 6 inches around the base of a structure need to be non-combustible. There's a lot to do. And this is where that grant work really helps. Next slide, please. Again, sorry for the PDF, but there's, again, great footage down there of embers just blowing down a road. Those embers come from burning vegetation, but more importantly, when you get into the urban environment, those embers also come from other structures. And this here is the key to this proposal, is that as long as we have structures in the hills, we have fuel in the hills. And as a fire department, we look at this in two ways. One, we look at people's personal homes, their property, their lives. That's an important part of this consideration. But when you look at this from a firefighting perspective, each one of those structures represents a 100-year-old tinder dry source of fuel that's surrounded by kindling. And so if we want to protect homes, we need to protect homes from adjacent structures. So we need to start with adjacent structures to make sure we're providing that level of protection to our community. This is part of the reason why fuel breaks alone fall short of providing protection. Fuel breaks are an important part of creating a fire-safe community, but those fuel breaks require maintenance. Those fuel breaks result in native grasses, seasonal landscape, things that can still burn. And so while we can reduce the hazard, and that's a very important part of this conversation, while we can reduce that hazard, we can't eliminate that hazard by looking strictly at fuel breaks. Next slide, please. One thing that we wanted to call out is that our current fire code, our current inspection and enforcement falls short of the scientifically supported mitigations included in the California Department of Insurance Safer from Wildfires framework. This results in us telling our residents that they are doing what is required and the insurers telling them they have fallen short. This results in increased premiums and non-renewals. Berkeley itself has 5.3 billion in assets within the FAIR plan, which is the highest in any community in Northern California. And this is industry's indication to us that current conditions equate to a very high risk of wildfire loss. Aligning our zone zero and aligning our home hardening with CDI SFW is the best way to not only protect our community, but also make sure our residents are getting the same message of the scientifically validated procedures. We can go 2 slides forward, if you will. Thank you. Let's turn to also briefly talk about the Leave Early campaign, which is somewhat unique to Berkeley, but is an important part of the strategy of the Ember proposal. So our evacuation challenge is new and it's not unique. This slide shows 2 different pictures that look almost identical. The top slide is from this year in the Palisades fire. Cars are backed up. People are abandoning them. You can make out a walker in the top of that picture. And the bottom picture is ours from 1991 from the Oakland Hills fire. The woman in the white shirt is running barefoot. So I would challenge us to ask what has changed since 1991. And we know that our roadways in the hills will not support large groups of people trying to move out of the way at the same time. We know that similar roadways in other jurisdictions in California have experienced the same challenge, regardless of the number of software solutions we've put in place, our increased ability to communicate with the community. All of this points to the reality that we cannot navigate our way around the challenge on extreme wildfire days. Next slide, please. We do have an opportunity. We can't tell you when and where a fire will start, but we can tell you about the weather that's associated with so many of these urban conflagrations. This chart is one that we used from last year. It doesn't have the LA fires on there, but they're in that bottom right box. So fast winds push fire and embers. Low humidity helps things ignite when they land, so that we know that especially low humidity, especially high wind days, are the conditions under which fire will move faster than we can evacuate residents. And these conditions are predictable. We can predict them with forecasts in Berkeley. And we currently, during those days, advise people that live in the hills to leave early before a fire starts because of those photos. We introduced the extreme fire weather idea in 2018. We know that these are rare events. We've only done it twice, once in October of 2020 and again once in 2024. We also know that the National Weather Service has a designation, PDS, particularly dangerous situation, which is a similar forecasting tool that they have that looks at similar events. One of the things that we are doing currently is aligning that with the National Weather Service to find the most extreme situations that present the most danger, that are also rare enough that we are not regularly asking people to do this. Next slide, please. So we talked about defensible space and home hardening. I also mentioned briefly how it's the challenge can seem insurmountable when you look at this from an individual perspective. But when we work together at scale, this matters. Next slide, please. There's dozens of ways or dozens of pathways for fire to spread through communities, and even just one area creates a vulnerability. And I want to circle back to something that came out of Lahaina. Next slide, please. So this is the red roof house that has been called a number of things, including the miracle home. It's over 100 years old. It was built long before the building codes were established and incorporated wildfire defense. It did not have any fire resistive features at the time before the fire. And next to that is a chart that was a post-incident analysis of the campfire in Paradise. It shows why structures ignited. You cannot see this, but those 3 blue boxes there are looking at the factors that correlate highest with which structures were lost. So in those blue boxes are defensible space, roof construction, and attached decking, which is to say that the three most important factors in whether a home survived or succumbed to the campfire in Paradise were defensible space, what the roof was made out of, and what was immediately around the home. So we look back at this photo of the Miracle House in Lahaina. This home was purchased 2 years before the fire, and the new homeowners recognized the home needed a lot of work. They did a number of things, but the first two things they did was remove all vegetation within first 5 feet of the house, and they replaced the roof with a metal roof. Did a bunch of other stuff, but those were the first two things they did. So I would propose that this is not a miracle home. This is an example of homeowners taking action when they could to provide protection. And the other thing I'd point out is that firefighters are going to come along and look at a home and they're going to ask themselves, does this home's construction support the firefighting effort, or is it detrimental to it? So if I show up and I have the opportunity to do the most good where I can to stop the fire for the remainder of the community, is this a home where it's a good place to anchor in and take up the fight? Or is this a home that is not worth the 500 gallons of water that I have, because that water is not going to stop this fire and I need to go find the home that is? And this is one of the homes that was. One of the challenges here, what's disappointing, is that everything west of this home was the Pacific Ocean. So if you can go on to the next slide, what's far more interesting is what happened about a mile north of this home. So just a mile north is Kahoma Village, which is a community that was built in 2017 after the residential codes changed and allowed for wildfire resistant construction. In this home, there's 250 structures. 4 of them burned in the Lahaina fire. This area of Lahaina is about a quarter-mile wide. The distance between Grizzly Peak Boulevard and Wildcat Canyon Road averages about a quarter mile. And what's far more interesting here is not the number of homes that were saved. And it's wonderful that 200 people get to keep their homes in Lahaina in this community. But when we look at this map of how fires spread through Lahaina, I think we can agree that this looks like a river that found an eddy and the water stopped. There's a point at which the fire could not progress any further north and had to find a pathway around to the right to get into northern Lahaina. So what you're looking at here is an almost complete stop of the fire's progression until it found an area where it could punch through. And I would ask us to consider what would happen if that community extended further to the east. Would we have saved all of northern Lahaina? I don't know. But this map sure seems to suggest there's something effective there. The photo is not Lahaina. The photo is from Chile outside of Valparaiso. There's a fire back there that took out huge swaths of that region. They do not have the robust firefighting service that California does. And so that community had to rely on its own work prior to the arrival of fire. Not a single home in this community burned, and not a single firefighter was there to protect it. This home fought this fire 2 years before the fire ever got there, and it won. Next slide, please. We can go through to the next slide if you would too. So this is a summary of the 3 things that the Ember proposal is looking at in Berkeley, which is adapting the fire code to implement Zone 0 in specific targeted areas and reduce our inspection process so that we are more specifically targeting those areas for full compliance. Looking at reforming the building code as a part of the triannual update process. We look for opportunities to encourage Class A roof replacement, along with finding incentives for home hardening. And then to reaffirm our Leave Early campaign, along with aligning the days that we choose or the days that we establish with the National Weather Service. And you can go on to the last slide there. This is a link for anyone that's interested that goes back to our local website, berkeleyfiresafe.org, where there's a lot of information about what we're currently doing and what we currently offer. And depending on the outcome of this proposal with City Council, we would also be loading any updates to there as well. That was a fairly rapid move through that in the interest of time. I presented it in that way in the sense that I think there's a lot of folks in the room that are already intimately familiar with this work, but I'm obviously here for questions if I move too quickly through anything or if there are further questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive presentation. I really appreciate the work that's being done in Berkeley and the comparisons to other fires, and nothing beats visual images to see how fire safe landscaping can save lives. I know we're running short on time, but I did want to open it up for questions. Supervisor Jarrett did want to end at noon, I believe, but if we can go a few minutes later, we can entertain a couple of questions. Councilmember.
Thank you. I make them fast. Could you please share, not now, later on by email, the Safe Passage Act and the building codes? We may want to adopt some of them.
Absolutely. I'll send you all the proposed language that we have so far. It's still going through the council process, but we can definitely share the draft language with you.
Appreciate it. And also I have a question about Xylo plan. Is it public information, how much it costs?
I don't know what the price tag was for Xylo plan. It was funded through for all of Alameda County through the Alameda County Coordinators Grant. And the information is, the report is due on the 28th, which is tomorrow. So it should be publicly available then.
Would you share it with us?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to grab my notepad so I can remember.
Thanks.
Other questions, colleagues? Comments? Okay. Public commenters. And in the interest of time, we will also keep it to 1 minute.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Norman LaForce, I'm on the Sierra Club California State Forestry Committee. And this is exactly what the club has been trying to say and get across, that the real issue is ignition proofing. We prefer to say ignition proofing because that is the way you really fight the fire. And one reason for that is that when the fires develop with the 100 to 80 mile an hour winds, there's no way any firefighting group can fight that. And it's because of the ember throw and what the embers do to buildings that are not ignition proofed. So this is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Henry De Niro again, Berkeley Fire Safe Council. Thank you, Chief. We've had extensive conversations with, I call them the three chiefs in Berkeley, between several of us in the Berkeley Fire Safe Council, and we are in 100% support of their Ember proposal. And we've learned a lot, and I think they've learned some things too. I'll just make one comment. The idea of a barrier, 80% protected community up near the wildland is important because a ground fire coming out of the wildland, in this case, the park, or low embers coming out of a fire, this boundary will protect it from breaking into the entire city. However, we have a unique situation in Berkeley where we have probably 10,000 eucalyptus trees in the park. I estimate 1,500 tons of fuel in the understory that has not been cleaned up. I've been here for 9 years. Most of the grows I see have not been cleaned up in 9 years. They've only accumulated. So I think there's a very high risk of a canopy fire going over the top of the barrier. And so we need to do both. We need to do ember to protect a low fire or a ground fire or a low ember throw. But we can't protect the whole city. We can't harden the whole city. We also need to do fairly dramatic fuel reduction in the wildland in order to prevent an ember storm coming over the top of this barrier. So this is the 80-20 question that Helen raised. I think it's debatable. Is it 80-20 or 50-50? We have to do both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Jim Hansen, California Plant Society, and speaking as a East Richmond Uplands resident. This is, I would just say that the February 11th presentation is on the city website in the special meeting, and is one of the most, I think, historic presentations I've seen. I would give it a 5 stars and more. And it really does highlight, and speaking as a native plant person, the importance of looking at my neighbors, my friends, my neighborhood. This and what you're doing, we do have opportunities already. We actually have such great fire-wise safety councils. The whole notion that this is actually doable. And I think the East Bay Wildfire Coalition, my thought and excitement about it is that it would provide our limited staffing, because that's what we have, borrowed staffing, to borrow from each other, to set up a mesh program, to set up, help develop landscaping technical assistance. We've got great designers here, but this is a very new thing. It's totally different. It's boggling. There are things we can do as a
Yes,
local
time,
government.
Jim, please wrap up.
Okay, as a local government, as we did with water and other kinds of issues. Thank you.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Zoom whenever you'd like to take it, Chair.
Oh, sure, we can finish with that first.
Okay, the question is from Erica Payne. Go ahead, Erica.
It's not so much a question, it's just a comment. My name is Erica Peng. I've been the lead organizer of my neighborhood's Firewise efforts in El Sobrante, and I fully support the threshold goals. My comments are about a missing piece, which is about how our fight, flight, freeze reactivity in crisis and threat actually results in resistance and defensiveness. This is informed by my work. I teach at Cal at the Haas Business School, and I teach leaders about how our behavior is not rational. There's data from the National Fire Protection Association, surveys in 56 counties in California and 26 in Oregon, that shows that enforcement by officials is one of the lowest motivators of fire mitigation behavior. So while I fully support that enforcement and compliance might be necessary, I really urge approaching these goals with eyes wide open, getting educated about fight, flight, freeze, how it drives behavior, and develop strategies with an awareness of how certain approaches might unintentionally trigger threat response and resistance and defensiveness and sabotage the wildfire preparedness goals that we're actually all working on.
Thank you. Comments from the members?
Thank you. I want to make a comment as the representative from Berkeley. I want to say, and Chief Arnold can nod if this is correct, that we had this amazing presentation a few weeks ago at council, and the public reaction, even though we're expecting them or we're asking them to do a lot, was almost universally positive. And so I'm getting the nod there. Thank you. And so those of you on the council who are in a position to maybe suggest something in your jurisdictions, don't be afraid of pushback. I think you'll find that people are very welcoming of this, even though it's pretty extreme.
Last quick question. Does Berkeley have a plan or has already done it to ban flammable plants, especially within zone 0? Like junipers?
Yeah, we have a current process of removing fire hazardous vegetation where we can. There is no current plan in this year's adoption of the fire code to specifically target species. Our number one goal is to reduce the hazard in terms of all vegetation within 5 feet of the structure. We do have the ability as the inspecting agency to recognize certain plants as more hazardous than others, and we would expect more mitigation of those plants, so further trimming. We don't currently have a plan to specifically call them out as not allowed.
Thank you. Maybe something to look at in future agenda.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I would just like to ask that any materials that you share with any of the members, you can send them centrally so we can all get them. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll share them with the board staff so that they get to everybody.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Okay. In that case, there's no vote required, so we will move to item 9, future meetings and agenda items, which we already discussed. So we will open it to open forum on the issue of future meetings and agenda items if there's any comment. Anything on Zoom? Okay.
No.
Then we will move to item 10, which is public comment for items not on the agenda. Members of the public, in person or Zoom. Okay, and then that was quick. Item 11. Oh. No. Okay. Item 11, board member comments. I just want to close by saying thank you to Chief Arnold for the presentation once again. Really appreciated the detail. Thank you for sharing what Berkeley is doing. And I think one of the goals of this body is to see how we can learn from each other's jurisdictions, and what is going on in Berkeley will benefit surrounding jurisdictions, and what we as neighboring cities and counties can do can all support each other. I think that's a great roadmap, and would love to, again, I believe you'll send us the presentation, but I love to keep it as talking points for future discussions about how we can work together, as this is a regional agency based off of an MOU, not JPA. We're not an enforcement body, but there's a whole lot that we can do when it comes to advocating with community members. As public commenters mentioned, enforcement alone can't change behavior, but advocacy and awareness and education can. And I think that there's a great amount of work that we can do collectively, along with the support of the public advocacy through Councilmember Weinegraff's work with us now, that I think can make this body really successful. I'm really excited to work with you all and Supervisor Joya to move into this year, which is year 2 of this coalition of governments. I think there's a lot of potential. Just as a brief note, I spoke to some of our federal legislators this past week about this body, and there was a lot of interest from representatives all across the Bay Area to see what they can do to support. They love the collaborative approach, and they know we'll be knocking on their door for funding opportunities. If not this year, at least next year, maybe when things calm down federally. Any other comments from fellow members before we adjourn?
I just urge everyone to please, let's calendar the next meeting as soon as possible, because the comment period for LRA is only 90 days and it already started. So we need, to act faster. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think, and I'm sure Supervisor Joy will send out an email very soon with some doodles. Thank you, Roger. And on that note, it is exactly 12 o'clock, so we will adjourn.